So this morning, we're going to make it a few more verses in chapter 1. Just a few more, not much further. And that is because when you look at the book of Genesis, there's a lot of major discussions that happen from the book of Genesis, which is why we're looking at it. But one of the biggest ones is going to be evolution, or at the very least macroevolution. What does Genesis have to say about that, right? Because here's the biblical account of creation versus what man would say or theorizes happened, which that's what evolution is. It's a theory. There's still a lot of, the missing link and a lot of other things that they're still out there trying to find. So it is a theory still, and not a fact. And you've probably heard this before, so I hate to be cliche about it, but evolution is just as much a matter of faith as creation is. And I know we've all heard that before. I quoted Hebrews chapter 11 when we started Genesis 2 weeks ago. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That's the definition of faith in the Bible, and that describes exactly what the theory of evolution is. Because as much as science is trying, they haven't proven it yet. But so many have chosen to say, well, they'll find it. They'll find the missing pieces. I have faith in that. And so I'm going to put my belief in evolution. So it's a matter of faith. That is faith. They don't want to call it that, but that's what it is. They're putting some faith in that potential theory being true. And even though you and I would say that there's overwhelming evidence against macroevolution, and there's plenty of evidence that supports God and the creation account, some just choose not to believe that. And we talked about that a little bit when we started Genesis 2 weeks ago as well, where there have, some, highly praised atheists and evolutionists who have, Richard Dawkins and others, who have said things along the lines of, okay, maybe there's the potential, that there was, or that the world was created, but they don't like the idea of the God of the Bible. If somebody did create Earth, it wasn't that guy. Well, why not? Well, because I don't want to have to change. Because if it is that guy, if it's God, and it's that God who created everything, well, then that means that God cares about me, and he wants me to live right, and that means I'll have to change this and change that, and I don't want to do that. So at the very least, I might say, fine, maybe there's creation here, but, I just don't believe in that God. That happens quite a bit as well. But either way, both creation, biblical creation, and the theory of evolution are matters of faith that people choose to believe. And so anyways, evolution is one of the major issues that we're going to come across in the book of Genesis, and primarily Genesis chapter 1, the first few verses, because already that's making a pretty critical stance against evolution there, or the theory. Now, I don't think that Moses, I think that's part of it, but I don't think he's writing this to disprove evolution. Like I said, there's a few reasons why Genesis is written. But the primary reason that this Genesis is written to these people, the children of Israel that are getting ready to walk into kind of this, a lot of unknown things, a lot of confusion, is he's wanting to reveal God. This is God, and this is what God is like, and how he works a little bit, and how he intends things. We looked at Romans as well when we started. Since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. That's Romans chapter 1. It's the very beginning. So we talked about that last time. God reveals himself to all of us through what he's created. And so that's what Genesis chapter 1 does, to point them and you and I in the direction of this is God, and look what he did and can do. That's how powerful God is, along with many other attributes. That's how divine in nature he is. And there's one thing that we're going to talk about this morning, one of his attributes. Because we could go through Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 and just sit here on a whiteboard and just list off all the attributes of God. What do we learn about God from Genesis chapter 1 and 2? We could do that all day. His awesome power, his wisdom, his faithfulness, his justice, just in the creation accounts alone. But like I said, this morning, we're just going to look at one attribute that I've talked about before. I actually had a lesson towards the end of June that mentioned this. So I don't want to repeat that lesson. So we'll talk about some other things. But we're going to point at just one attribute of God that we see in the first 5 verses that make all the difference. If the people originally reading the account of Genesis can understand this, it's going to drive their life in a very particular direction and keep them on a very particular path. And it's the same for you and I today, because if we miss this, we're in a whole lot of trouble. So, first 4 verses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God said that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Kind of interesting stuff that I don't know, right? But God creates the heavens and the earth. And then we read that the earth that he's created is this formless void. And also, there's water there. I have so many questions and very little to no answers for. We could sit here and say, why do that, right? But I'm past the why does God do that, and I'm focused more on, he says, let me make this, and it's just this formless kind of like blob. And again, I've mentioned before how strange water is all throughout Scripture, and this is where it starts, because it is from the beginning. God creates the earth; it's this formless void, and of course it has water on it, because why would God make anything? And we don't know what water is, or we do now, right? But God creates for the first time this thing, and water's on it, and then you read that the Spirit of God is moving over the surface of the waters. Why? I don't know. It's just some really interesting thing. I don't want to stick too much on water, but it's just, I don't know, there's the first reference to it, and it's very strange that if I gave you, I don't know, if you could create anything just off the top of your head, would you create this formless ball and be like, let's put this liquid on there? But that's what God was like, boom, let's do this. And then he gets to work on separating the water and then doing other things, right? But verse 2 says that the earth was formless, so it's a wasteland. There's nothing there. And void. I guess that would be the nothing there. So there's the emptiness and the desolate wasteland. And darkness was over the surface of the deep. Again, we come back to the whole water thing. Very weird. Isaiah 45 verse 18 tells us that God formed the earth, so he makes it, and then he forms it, according to Isaiah 45, to make it inhabitable. He creates this thing, and then he says, now I'm going to make it. Let's make this livable. Let's make this to where things can live on this. So God, out of his great love and desire for man to share fellowship between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, God says, well, let's make what I've created inhabitable, and we can share this relationship together. So obviously, and this is hard to wrap our heads around, that's what Genesis does. There's a lot of stuff in there. If God would have left things the way that they were, or like they initially were, there would be no life on this earth. And you could say, no, God can do whatever he wants. Yes, but it's the fact that he creates the earth, it's a formless void, and then we find out later in Isaiah that God had decided that's uninhabitable. I'm going to make it inhabitable. So if God had not decided to do that, then it would be uninhabitable. Life would not be possible. But God, through his word, brings order. There's void, there's formlessness, and God speaks order. So, just to run through them, he brings light, he separates the waters, he brings the dry land, vegetation, the stars, the sun and the moon, the sea creatures, the birds of the sky, the beasts of the earth. And then when he's brought order to all of those things, he creates man. And that's the attribute that I want to stick on this morning because, like I said, if we miss this, and that's what we're going to talk about, if you miss this, then you're in a whole world of trouble, literally. God is a God of order. Only he could take this formless void nothing and then make it to be in order. And he does the same for my life and for your life as well, for our own good. And so when you consider that, that explains why everything is such a mess. And you and I know that. I don't want to be gloom and doom this morning and just be super negative. But I want you to come away with this glad that you have faith in God. And then for others who do not have a faith in God and are choosing to say there is no God, or if there is, he doesn't care, and maybe evolution is the way, then this is kind of a bit of a warning, which again, according to Romans 1, should plainly be seen but is often ignored. I don't want to start any problems with this, but Satan's obviously been at work forever. But a lot of people point back to 1963 for a big change. You remember what happened in 1963? I don't. I can read about it. Okay. The Supreme Court makes a ruling in the case of Stone versus Graham, that was in Kentucky. There is a copy of the Ten Commandments hanging in the hallway of a school. And the Supreme Court ruled that it was a passive display, meaning it's there, and if you want to read it, if the kids or the teachers in this school want to read it, they can, and if they don't, you can keep going. It's not threatening them in any way. Just a copy of the Ten Commandments up on the wall. Supreme Court rules it's a passive display. But then they add, because the Ten Commandments might induce the school children to read it and meditate on it, there's a chance that that child might obey the commandments. And if they do that, then we have promoted religion, a specific religion, to these school children. So it must be removed. And again, I'm not saying that's the source of the problem, because Satan is the source of the problem, and this has all been going on for forever. But that Supreme Court ruling in 1963 is one that a lot of people hang on to and say, well, they took God out of schools. Now, beyond that, I think it was during my time, whatever that means, right? But you know what I mean. Some point, I think, when I was in elementary, middle, high school, I could be wrong on this, but it was okay for the football coach, because I remember seeing this in school, the football coach would huddle up the players and would pray. That used to be perfectly fine. And somewhere in my time, that became not okay. And having Bibles in school, I don't know, I'd have to look it up. I think if I were in high school right now and thinking back to when I was in high school, I think it was okay to have a Bible, but teachers having a Bible, any sort of staff having a Bible or having that out on their desk or reading it, or especially talking about anything faith related to their children, I think that happened in my time, where all of that was pushed out. So 1963, they say, well, don't put the commandments up on a wall, because then somebody might read that and then do it. And then, I don't know, maybe you remember something from when you were in school. Ron, did you have something?
Yeah, we were told as teachers that when someone sneezes, you can't say bless you.
When was that? 5 years ago? Okay, yeah. That makes sense with the timeline in my head. That's nuts. So if you didn't hear Rhonda, roughly 5 years ago, teachers were told if a student sneezes, you are not allowed to say, God bless you. Yeah. So there's been a pretty heavy ongoing effort, which has definitely picked up steam in the last, man, I hate that, but I graduated high school 10 years ago, so in the last decade or more. That's rough, man. 28, that's no good. Right, we've talked about my age before.
I can remember in junior high, I think the 7th grade, we would, after we said orally the Pledge of Allegiance, we'd stand up and we'd say the Lord's Prayer the whole time.
Wow.
Everybody would, out loud.
That's hard to imagine today. That would have been hard to imagine 10 years ago. Wow. A lot of us would say, and myself included, that 1963 they get rid of the commandments, and then there's just been this domino effect of all the way to can't say God bless you when someone sneezes. Pretty heavy effort to remove God, not just from schools, but from society altogether. And if somebody who does not believe in God, does not go to church, is watching this video, well, it's just not being live streamed, so if you're watching this later, if they're watching this later and they're like, and you're going to say because we took Bibles out of schools and because we took down the 10 Commandments and we won't let them say God bless you, you think that that's what's caused the world to just be completely thrown into chaos? Yeah, kind of. At least the very possibility of not pushing God out would have made a big difference. I don't have stats for anything. That probably would have been neat for me to do. I thought about it and then I didn't do it. And also, probably just for my own mental health, it's probably just not a good idea to do that. But you can probably look up number of shootings in the country this week so far, and I'm sure one is too many, but I'm sure it's hundreds. I don't know, it could be 1,000. I honestly don't know what a good number on that would be. We'd have to look that up. I know Chicago, there was at least 1 year where they had 3,000 shootings that year. And no one is exempt from that. It's kids and it's adults. And I'm not trying to focus on guns like they're bad. I'm not trying to do that. But that's just one example. But people burning things down, rioting against the police, not saying that police don't make mistakes either. That certainly happens as well. Bad choices and people who shouldn't be in places of enforcement that are. And we could sit here and talk about incident after incident that just, there's not really another way to say that. It's just godless people, godless acts. People who don't know better, who could know better if they were able to be told better, or if they had the opportunity to read better. And we've worked so hard to remove God and even if it's a passive display, get the 10 Commandments off the wall, get the Bibles out of the school. A kid might read that, and I think I don't think it's wrong for me to say that that's had effects on things. So it seems that, way too much is just in a mess, right? And even some of our laws don't make sense. I won't get too much into that, but could it truly be the reason that the reason things are so messed up and out of order is because culture and society have pushed God out. And I think so because you read Genesis chapter 1 in the first 5 verses, and they read about, and you and I read about today, here is God. And God makes order. And order makes for peace. Order makes for harmony. And this is pretty much the point for the rest of the lesson here. So I'll give it away. That doesn't mean you can check out, though. If you push out God, who creates order, which creates peace and harmony, what do you expect? This is really, really neat. Jeremiah chapter 4, if you want to scroll over there. Jeremiah chapter 4. Just look at this or listen to this for a moment. Really quickly, Jeremiah, he was a prophet, roughly between the years 625 to 586 BC. And as prophets were, he was sent to warn the people of Judah and Jerusalem, because these people are rebelling against God. They're doing godless things. They are pushing God out. In Jeremiah chapter 5, I'm going to read Jeremiah chapter 4, but in Jeremiah chapter 5, you get a short list of what they're doing: moral corruption, sexual impurity, unbelief in God, religious apostasy, social injustice, and they are led by corrupt leaders. Right? Same old song and dance, right? Just copy paste for every generation since. But that's what they're doing. And so a prophet is sent, Jeremiah is sent to Judah and Jerusalem, go warn these people from pushing out God and warn them what the consequences are. And in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23, I looked on the earth, and behold, it was formless and void. Exact same words from Genesis. I look at the heavens, and they have no light. I look on the mountains, and behold, they are quaking. The hills are moving to and fro. I look, and behold, there's no man. And all the birds of the heavens have fled. I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a wilderness, and all of its cities were pulled down before the Lord, before his fierce anger. For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not execute a complete destruction. This is a warning, and it is scary. You and I reading it today should also be a warning. But it's also kind of neat, given what we're studying in the book of Genesis, because it points to two things. Kind of. It's the same thing, but they're two different things in a sense. These people are rebelling against God. They're pulling away from him. They're pushing God out of their society. They're removing him from the picture, as it were. And as a result, what we find is what we're looking at here, which is you remove the God of order, then you've removed order. Jeremiah comes and he says, let me tell you what I'm seeing. It's going to come crashing down. You get rid of the God of order, the one true God of, he's the God of all, but the God who creates order, then you'll have no order, you'll have chaos. And that's what Jeremiah warns him of. But it's also kind of neat, because what you also get from Jeremiah here is, we have in Genesis, there's a formless void, and then God creates order and everything. And now Jeremiah is warning these people that are pushing out God, kind of this idea of, if you get rid of God, what would you have without him? And Jeremiah describes, I look on the earth and behold, it was formless and void. You want to get rid of God? You have any idea what he's done? Because in the beginning, all of this was formless and void. And then he fills it with all these things, and then these people still choose to push God out. And Jeremiah says, imagine if the world was formless and void, and there's no birds, and there's no man, and the towers, the cities have just fallen. It's a wilderness. And there's kind of this attitude of God brings order and harmony and peace. You want to remove God from the picture? Okay. But you lose God, you lose all the things that come with God. And that's a lot. It's chaos without God. And again, I don't tell you I don't tell you that to discourage you at all. But again, it's encouragement in your faith in God being the right place to put that, and to encourage you to keep God in the center of your life, and to warn others of the danger of turning away from God. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33. I'll just read this really quick. The church of Corinth, right? So obviously we've fast-forwarded quite a bit. Here's Jeremiah warning the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Let's fast-forward to the church in Corinth in chapter 14. And it's unfortunate, but we just know, church in Corinth, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And in chapter 14, verse 33, God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. And then a little bit further down in chapter 14, let all things be done properly and in an orderly manner. What happens to society when they kick God out? What happens to a church, a congregation, when they leave God out? When people's agendas overtake God's order. Romans chapter 5, I know I'm quoting a bunch of verses here, but therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. I've been doing this kind of parallel here, and I know you've been following along with me, so it's fine. But peace would be the opposite of chaos. If there's peace, then there's order. Things are working. If there's chaos, then there's disorder, and there's no peace. So when an individual decides to put on Christ in baptism and follow him, then that individual is at peace with God. And then hopefully, as you allow God to rule over the different aspects of your lives, then you'll find that he does things in an orderly manner. And he's not a God of confusion or chaos. He's a God of peace. He created order from the very beginning. And we can stick with that all the way through our personal lives, and you will find order. And along with order, peace. And along with peace, harmony. And it's pretty plain to see that if you remove God, I see this all the time. Somebody will post it on Facebook from time to time. But some image with text over it to the point of, if what you had today was only the things you thanked God for yesterday, what would you have? Right? And typically what that's supposed to get your mind to thinking is, well, I didn't thank God for anything that I have yesterday, so I would have nothing today. And that's kind of, again, one of hundreds of attributes that we learn about God through the first 2 chapters of Genesis. But I would argue that this one is the most important, is that God is a God of order. God makes order. And if you try, you won't find order, working, peaceful order outside of God. We've tried to. It's not working. And that happens on a societal level where, again, I don't want to stand up here and just bash. But you and I know what we're all thinking, right? But I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about how when I was graduating high school 10 years ago, that there are no gender norms. And if boys want to wear pink, which is fine, I wear pink, but you know what I mean. If boys want to play with dolls and do this, like, that's not a girl thing to play with dolls. It's not a girl thing to like pink and these other they're just as much of a boy as a boy who likes dinosaurs, and vice versa with girls wanting to play with dinosaurs and other things. There are no gender norms, but then somehow that got flipped into if your boy is 3 and keeps picking up the Barbie doll, instead of he's just as much a boy as a boy who plays with dinosaurs, now he's probably a girl and you should probably get that checked out. That doesn't make any sense. First of all, it doesn't make any sense. But then secondly, a few years, like 1 year before that, we were saying there are no gender norms, and now we're saying there are gender norms. And again, we could do this all day. None of what's happening right now is based in any sort of reality or any sort of order. It so easily unravels into how can you say this is true and this is right when at the same time you're saying this and they completely... There are so many prevailing worldviews right now that just go up against each other. It's already chaos, and more as the years go by, and again, I'm not trying to waste so much time bashing this, but the some of the different letters, right, the LGBTQ, some of these letters are starting to fight these other letters. Because some of these letters, their beliefs are that these other letters don't exist, and so this all-inclusive, everyone is involved, everyone's included, and everyone is loved, that's starting to crumble because that's not true. And they're finding that out. And so already that's caused enough chaos, and now it's causing chaos with our children. But now they're infighting because they're realizing none of this makes any sense, and they're trying to make it make sense. It's not working. And that's the really bad stuff. I mean, there's more to that. There's a lot of people living in different kinds of chaos, and it's because they've kicked God out. Families torn apart through divorce, children that are injured mentally and emotionally and physically due to abuse, families destroyed by alcoholism and drugs, women and children finding themselves in places where they're not wanted, people who have lost everything because of gambling habits, how many registered sex offenders there are and have to report on a monthly basis. And you can't convince me, I understand that some people just don't have the mental capacity, and I understand that there's various things, but you just go back generation to generation and think, that could have been so different if they hadn't kicked out God. That family could have stayed together, they would have avoided abusing this substance, and then that would have made this child's life so much better, and they would have grown up, and if they would have chosen to keep God, then they would have chosen order and peace, and that means their life, their adult life would have been better, and they wouldn't have done this or done that with their life, with me, which means their child would have grown. It's so easy to piece it all back together to if the moment we kicked out God, then there's lawlessness and confusion, and well, which way do we go? Because there's a million different ways that the world's come up with. It's chaos. And it's wonderful. You can say, we were watching some movie last night. I didn't watch it. I'm a dad now, right? So I did the thing where I stood in there and watched it for a second, and then I just kind of slowly sat down in a chair for a little bit, and I was like, all right, I gotta get out of there. I don't know what the movie was. I didn't really care much for it, but there's some point where the girl was like 15 or 16, and she's writing a letter to her dad, and she's talking about how you put me under all these restrictions, and I wasn't allowed to hang with these people or do this and do that, and I understand now that it wasn't just mindless, control that you're trying to put on me. It was order that you were giving me for a reason, because you knew what things were out there and how bad things can get and how much disorder and chaos could come into my life the moment I throw open that door. And even Christians, non-Christians especially, but even Christians read the account of Genesis and say, even if I believe in creation, I don't want to believe in a God who has set an order in place and that we have to do what he says. Even some Christians feel that way. I don't like these, what they would view as restrictions on our life. I think it's always been foolish. It's especially foolish today if you look at the world around us. to view God's word as it's just a bunch of mindless restrictions because he just wants to push us around, when it's, no, he knows the chaos that is out there. A lot of you, myself included, looking at, again, some of the things I just talked about with the transgenderism and all these things, did not see this coming. We did not see it picking up this much steam. We did not see people even believing this stuff and living these lifestyles. We did not see this coming, for the most part. God knew that that was possible. And what else does God know? What other chaos is out there that God knows about that you and I haven't even considered being a possibility? That's why he creates, from the beginning, there's an order to things. And if you will follow that order, if you will follow God, then there's order, there's peace, there's harmony. If society and culture will choose God, there will be order and peace and harmony. And so long as we kick God out, then we kick out this God who took a formless and void thing, and that's what we're going to be left with. You kick God out, then you kick out what God's given you. And we're going to end up with a formless, void, nothing. That's pretty much all I got this morning, unless there's any thoughts, comments, questions, anything. Frank?
I think a lot of it exists because good people don't do anything about it.
For sure.
They just sit. And what happens is you have one guy that has an idea and somebody else chimes in with him because there's something for him to gain monetarily or whatever, power.
Mm-hmm.
But good people that don't get up and let their voices be heard, I really feel a lot of respect for people that I see on TV in a public setting that absolutely stand up, like parents are starting to do now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue just takes one person. It takes one person to start it in the bad direction, and it just takes another person to turn it around. People really and truly want to be on the bandwagon of good. They just get sidetracked by some person who, for personal gain, wants to take it the other way. I know I'm talking about today's society. You're talking about from the beginning, but it's not much change.
Right. Well, I was just going to say there's nothing new, truly.
That's exactly right.
And I was going to tack onto that. Again, if we consider who Genesis is written to and why, I mean, just imagine the children of God in the wilderness, and they're getting ready to walk out into America 2023. I mean, it would blow their minds. And that's essentially what's happening. They're getting ready to go into Canaan land, and they're going to meet all these people who say, we do this, and we believe in this, and we worship this God that I made out of this. And it's going to blow them away. And Genesis is not just so hide and keep to yourselves, but it's, this is the one true God, and this is how you ought to live, and this is what he's done. And other people are going to see that life, and there's going to be dialogue between you and those people ultimately. Right? That's the plan as life goes on and the Gentiles grafted in and all that stuff. But it's a very similar thing, like what you're saying, which is we are not meant to be, this is the truth, and so we'll just huddle together and run from that stuff, but instead stand up and say, this is the truth. Anything else? Cool. Thanks, guys.